In this lesson, we discuss user data nodes, which are really interesting judging by what they can do. Let's say I have a standard surface shader in my scene applied to these three objects, but I want to have different base colors, specular weights, specular roughness, transmission color, for example, for each of these objects. So one shader, but with different properties for each object. That sounds interesting, so let's see what we can do. First, let's create a new standard surface shader and apply it to the glass, the sphere, and the object, and run the IPR. Now let's open up the network editor here. On the left side, you can find user data nodes. You have user data float, integer, RGB, RGBA, and string. For the first step, let's see if we can use three different colors as our base color for these three different objects. So we are dealing with color, and let's bring in a user data RGB node connected to the base color of the standard surface shader. If I select the user data RGB node, you can see we have two options: attribute and default. In the attribute field, you need to write a name which best represents the attribute you are trying to control. In this case, it is base color, so let's type something like, for example, B color for base color. It can be anything, but now you can type anything you want. As I mentioned, we need to add the same attributes to our objects. So starting with the glass, let's select it, and in the attribute manager, user data menu, and click on add user data, and select this data and change the name to B color. Change the data type from float to color and press OK. Now I have a new tab called user data and a color attribute. Let's use this pinkish color. As you can see now, the base color for the glass is pink, and the color for the sphere and the object are pure black, and this black color is coming from the default color in the user data RGB node. So if I change this default color to something like red, for example, they would have this red color by default if we don't assign a color attribute like we did with the glass. So let's select the glass and select the B color attribute, right click on it, user data interface, and copy user data interface. Now select the sphere again, user data menu, and paste user data interface. So you can see you have this B color data, and press OK. Now let's use this bluish color. Now as you can see, we have this blue sphere. Let's do the same thing for the object. Select the object, user data menu interface, paste user data interface, and press OK. And let's use this purple color here. So even though we have one standard surface shader applied to all of these objects, but we get three different base color for these objects. Now let's select the standard surface shader node, open up the specular section. Now I want the same user data RGB node to control the specular color of these three objects as well. So let's connect the output of our user data RGB node to the specular color of the standard surface shader. Now as you can see, we have three different specular colors for these three objects as well. Now let's say I want to have three different specular weights for these three objects. So we need a user data float node. So let me drag this to the work area, and for the attribute, let's type something like S weight for specular weight, or type whatever you want, and let's connect it to the specular weight of the standard surface shader. Now select the glass, from user data menu, click on add user data. Let's rename this data to S weight, change the interface to float slider, and down here you can see we have a slider. Let me just change the unit from percent to real, and the maximum number for specular weight in our standard surface shader is 1, so let's change the max number to 1. And right now if I try to change my slider with the mouse, I can only go between 0 and 1, so we need to change this step to something like 0.05. Now we can go a bit smoother in the slider. Now let's set the default value back to 0 and click OK. Now we have a S weight attribute for the glass, and as I increase it, I increase the specular weight of the glass separately from other objects. I can right click on the sweight from UserData submenu, choose copy UserData interface. Now select the sphere, paste UserData interface. Let's move it down so it's after the B color, and let's do the same thing for the object. Now I can have different specular weights for these three objects. So let's set the specular weight for the class 2.2, for the sphere 2.65, and let's say 0.95 for the object. So one standard surface shader is applied, but now we have three different shaders in the scene, and we still can go ahead and do the same thing with other attributes. Maybe we can try to make the glass transmissive without changing the sphere and the object. I invite you to try that. So that's how you can use UserData Nodes, and still there is a lot you can do here. See you in the next lesson.